A 48-year-old black CEO walked into her own luxury hotel only to be told, "We're full, guests only." She didn't argue. Instead, she made one phone call that changed everything. She wasn't asking for anything special. No welcome crew, no fancy perks. Just a key, a quiet bed, and one night to gather herself before a board meeting she hadn't planned to attend in person. When Vanessa Claiborne stepped through the glass doors of the Oakmark Grand Hotel in Des Moines, Iowa, she didn't come looking for attention. Her entrance was quiet, her presence calm. She wore simple loafers, neat slacks, and a plain, dusty blue silk blouse. A well-worn canvas duffel hung from her shoulder. No assistant, no flash, just her. To most, she looked like any guest, or maybe someone hoping to blend in. Behind the front desk, a young receptionist absent-mindedly chewed on her pen and tapped her acrylic nails on the keyboard. She gave Vanessa a half-smile, the kind that usually comes before a polite rejection. "Checking in?" she asked. Vanessa returned the smile. "Yes, under Claiborne, Vanessa." The receptionist typed, then frowned. I'm not seeing any reservation under that name." "That's okay," Vanessa replied calmly. "There should be a suite reserved for me." "We're actually full tonight," the girl said, her tone shifting. "You need a confirmed reservation. It's for guests only." Vanessa's expression didn't change, but the energy in the room did. She glanced behind the receptionist to the gold plaque on the wall. Oakmark Grand, a Claiborne property. Her name wasn't just supposed to be on a reservation, it was on the building. "I am a guest," she said softly. "And more than that, I own this hotel." The girl blinked, clearly stunned, like she'd just been told Vanessa was royalty. Then she smirked, skeptical. "You own the Oakmark?" Vanessa nodded, steady as ever. The girl reached for the desk phone. "I'll need to call the manager." "Go ahead." From across the lobby, a couple in golf shirts turned their heads. A man by the fireplace looked up. Vanessa could feel it. That moment when people start wondering if you're telling the truth and assume you're not. A few minutes later, a tall man with a lopsided tie and a clipboard stepped out from a side hallway. His badge read Assistant Manager, Neil Dorrance. He looked at Vanessa and immediately switched on his customer service smile. "Good evening. Is there an issue with your reservation?" "She says she owns the hotel," the receptionist said a little too loudly. Neil hesitated. "I don't say I do," Vanessa replied, locking eyes with him. "I do. I'm Vanessa Claiborne. You'll find my name on every quarterly report and executive memo. I'm here for one night. There should be a suite held under the owner's block." Neil pushed his glasses up and mumbled, "Right. Give me one moment." He turned away, whispering into his walkie-talkie as he disappeared behind a door. Vanessa didn't move. She didn't fidget, didn't raise her voice. But the atmosphere was getting heavier. Then security showed up. Not aggressive, but definitely noticeable. One posted near the elevators, the other by the coffee bar. Just watching. Vanessa stood her ground. Still, calm, but inside she felt that slow burn. Not because they didn't recognize her, but because they looked at her and assumed she didn't belong. Again, she could have pulled out ID, showed proof, even photos from the grand opening 6 years ago. But she didn't. Instead, she stepped back, took out her phone, and made one short call. That's all it took. Because this wasn't just about a room, it was about something deeper, and everyone around her was about to find that out. She didn't pace or sigh or film the moment like others might have. She stood by a marble pillar, phone in hand, simply waiting. The call had lasted 26 seconds. She didn't yell, just calmly stated, "I've been denied access to my own property. Please take care of it." At the front desk, the receptionist kept clicking away like the screen might change. A moment later, Neil returned holding a folder. He looked uneasy. But when he saw Vanessa still there, composed, he softened his tone. "Ms. Claiborne," he said, clearly trying harder now, "there seems to have been a misunderstanding. We just need to verify." "You can verify all you want," Vanessa said gently, cutting him off. "I'm not moving." Neil glanced toward security. No one moved. The room held its breath. The staff frozen in a quiet standoff, unsure what to do next. Apologize? Push back? Either way, the message had already been sent. She noticed the stairs. 3 women by the window whispering behind their hands. A young guy with a half-open laptop pretending not to listen. The doorman had stopped greeting people. Then she saw it. The receptionist under the desk, sneaking a look at her phone, probably Googling her name, probably not expecting much. It might have been funny if it weren't so familiar. It always seemed to go down like this. People thought they knew what success looked like, how power talked, what an owner should dress like. And someone like her? Brown skin, hair pulled up into a neat puff, no designer bag, no flashy jewelry. She didn't fit their image. So they doubted her. And that's what hurt. Not the rejection, but the fact that it wasn't even shocking anymore. She thought back to another hotel lobby, years ago in Milwaukee. She was 28, just made VP, wearing heels that rubbed her feet raw, and a suit that was way too big because it was all she could afford. Security followed her the entire time. The only reason she didn't get kicked out was because the CFO came down to meet her himself. She never forgot that day. And here she was, 2 decades later, still having to prove herself in a building she literally owned. She let out a quiet sigh, scanning the room. No one had said sorry. No one had tried to fix it. Just a lot of awkward silence and sideways glances. And then the elevator dinged. 2 men stepped out, one in a gray suit with a clipboard, the other in a company fleece. They didn't look like hotel staff, and they walked with urgency. Vanessa knew exactly who they were. Brent Kessler, the regional VP, and Carlos Reno, the district manager. Now it was their faces that looked tense. Brent rushed over, giving Neil a quick nod but not stopping. "Miss Claiborne, I'm so sorry. I just got the call." Carlos, slightly out of breath, chimed in. "We're handling it right now." Neil tried to explain, but Brent shut him down with just a glance. The receptionist froze, her eyes wide as it finally clicked. Her face went pale, and she slowly stepped back. Carlos checked his tablet. 12th floor suite is ready. The driver's being rerouted to take you wherever you need in the morning. Your usual fruit tray and espresso will be waiting." Vanessa gave a small smile. "Thank you." But she wasn't done watching. She wanted to see how things shifted now that they knew who she was, how their tones changed, their body language. She needed to see how power worked once it walked through the door. Because it's one thing to get disrespected when people don't know who you are, but it hits different when they do it anyway. Carlos pulled Neil aside, his voice sharp and low. Brent was already on the phone, throwing around words like HR protocol and service misconduct. The unease that had been pointed at Vanessa was now bouncing around the staff like wildfire. Vanessa didn't gloat. She didn't cross her arms or act smug. She calmly walked back to the front desk, step by quiet step, and set her phone down. "I'll take the suite on 12, she said evenly. "Same setup. Please have someone check that it's clean." The receptionist opened her mouth but didn't say anything. Vanessa didn't wait. She turned to Brent. "Am I checked in?" "Just finished," he said, flipping his clipboard. "You'll have 2 key cards and an incident report before the elevator hits your floor." "Good. And the rest?" He nodded. A site-wide alert went out. Corporate's audit team is on standby. All staff will be going through retraining on guest protocol. Disciplinary steps start tonight. Vanessa glanced at the receptionist, who was now biting the inside of her cheek, her acrylic nails tapping nervously on the desk. The rhythm had changed, no longer careless, now uneasy. "You'll talk to her," Vanessa said calmly. Brent cleared his throat. "Yes, ma'am. Privately, with HR present." Carlos looked like he wanted to add something, but Vanessa held up a hand. "I'll speak to her too. Not now, after I've rested." She picked up the key cards, gave a small nod, and headed to the elevator. Heads turned. Some whispered. Most just watched. No one dared say a word to her. The doors opened, then closed behind her. As they did, she caught a glimpse of Neil, still standing rigid behind the desk, sweat gathering on his brow. Upstairs, her suite smelled faintly of lemon and eucalyptus. The fruit tray was there, espresso pods neatly placed next to the machine, a handwritten card with her initials on the table, clearly thrown together in a hurry. She walked through the room slowly, not just checking for dust or fingerprints, but something deeper. She was looking for signs that someone, somewhere, still cared about the experience she built from the ground up. This hotel wasn't just a business to her, it was a piece of her life. She remembered being 33, standing in a bank office in Minnesota, pitching her dream to people who didn't believe in her. They barely listened, handed her harsh loan terms, and basically dared her to make it work. And she did. Now, almost 20 years later, standing in one of her signature penthouse suites, she was still having to prove she belonged. Her phone buzzed. A message from her assistant popped up. "Everything's in motion. Let me know if you want to go public." Vanessa paused. She could have blown the whole thing up. One tweet, and it would have gone viral. One interview, and the headlines would write themselves. But that wasn't what tonight was about. This wasn't about anger or payback. It was about something deeper, respect. The kind too often tied to surface-level assumptions instead of truth. She sat quietly on the edge of the bed, fingers laced, just breathing. Outside, the city moved along, cars humming down Grand Avenue, a distant train horn from the industrial side of town. But in the suite, it was quiet, still, heavy. Then, a knock on the door. "Room service." A young man wheeled in a fresh espresso, a handwritten apology from the kitchen manager, and an offer for a complimentary massage. Vanessa thanked him softly and closed the door behind him. She took a sip of the espresso, then turned toward the window, watching the soft city lights flicker. Something inside her was shifting, not just in that moment or in the hotel, but in her. Change was coming. At exactly 6:30 the next morning, Vanessa stepped out of the elevator, not as a guest, but as the CEO. She wore a deep charcoal suit, a crisp ivory blouse, and heels that echoed across the polished floor. Her focus was sharp. No one dared to interrupt her. The lobby had just started to come alive with early checkouts and sleepy coffee runs, but everything paused when she walked through. Staff turned. Conversations stopped. Even the barista froze mid-pour. Brent and Carlos were already waiting by the fireplace, each holding a folder and untouched cups of coffee. They looked like they hadn't slept, and probably hadn't. Vanessa gave a small nod and headed straight to the executive meeting room just past the concierge. Brent followed closely, Carlos right behind him. Inside, seated stiffly at the table, were assistant manager Neil, the front desk receptionist, Kayla Mendez, according to her name tag, and a woman from HR who simply introduced herself as Marta, from corporate. Her notepad was already open. Vanessa didn't sit. She stayed standing at the head of the table, arms folded. The room was quiet, thick with tension. Then, calmly, Vanessa spoke. "Would someone like to explain what happened last night, from your point of view?" Kayla immediately looked down. Neil opened his mouth but couldn't find a word. Vanessa waited. Finally, Kayla mumbled, "I just didn't think she was... I didn't expect. You didn't expect someone like me to own the building, Vanessa said, finishing the sentence for her. Still calm, still in control, Kayla gave a small nod. Was I rude to you? Vanessa asked. Kayla shook her head. No, ma'am. Did I raise my voice? No. Did I threaten anyone? Kayla's voice was barely a whisper now. No. Vanessa took a breath, then turned toward Marta. I'm not looking to make this a firing squad, she said, but I do expect accountability. Marta nodded. Understood. Carlos jumped in. We're prepared to issue a formal write-up and take her off front desk duty until she completes recertification. Neil will be put on administrative review while we conduct additional interviews. Vanessa gave a small nod and finally sat down. She looked at Kayla again. How long have you worked here? 4 months. And in that time, how often have you thought about who created this hotel? Where it came from? Kayla hesitated. I guess I just thought it was owned by a corporation, some group of investors or something. Vanessa let the silence linger. Do you know how many hotels I've built in this country? She asked. Kayla shook her head. 17, from Baltimore to Phoenix. Every one of them built with intention. Luxury designed to feel human, service meant to feel real. I created this brand because I was tired of being treated like I didn't belong. So tell me why. When I walk into my own lobby, I'm still invisible to the people working under my name. Her voice wasn't angry. It was tired, heavy, honest. Kayla looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. Neil stared ahead, his face flushed. Carlos spoke again. We've already drafted a memo. It'll go out to every Claiborne hotel today. Mandatory inclusivity training. No exceptions. Vanessa turned to him. Make sure it's not just a box to check. I don't want people memorizing lines. I want them to understand what respect looks like when no one's watching. Brent finally broke the silence. We'll make it real. That was her cue. Vanessa stood, and the meeting was over. As she stepped out of the conference room, the lobby seemed to straighten itself out. Staff rushed to look busy. A few nodded nervously in her direction, but she didn't acknowledge them. Not yet. She wasn't interested in appearances. She was waiting for something real. Before she left the hotel, there was one more conversation she needed to have. It had nothing to do with protocols or paperwork. Vanessa waited until the morning rush had died down. She wasn't trying to make a scene. She just wanted clarity. No ringing phones, no fake smiles, no excuses, just stillness and honesty. She spotted Kayla Mendez alone in the staff lounge behind the coffee bar, sitting at a small table with a half-eaten blueberry muffin and her phone face down. She looked drained. Vanessa didn't send someone to fetch her. She walked in herself. Kayla jumped up so fast she nearly spilled her drink. Relax, Vanessa said, pulling out the chair across from her. I just want to talk. Yes, ma'am, Kayla whispered. Drop the ma'am, Vanessa replied gently. This isn't a disciplinary meeting. Kayla nodded, eyes lowered. They sat for a beat, the hum of the fridge and soft overhead buzz filling the space. Then Vanessa asked, Have you ever worked somewhere that made you feel small? Kayla blinked, then looked up. Yeah, most jobs, honestly. Tell me. Kayla hesitated, then shrugged. I worked at a diner off I-80 for a year. Paper hat, grease everywhere. Got yelled at by cooks constantly. Most customers didn't tip. Some called me kid, even though I was 27. I felt invisible every shift. Vanessa leaned back slightly. So you know what it's like to be dismissed? Kayla nodded. Yes. Vanessa looked her in the eyes. Then help me understand how you looked right at me last night and decided I didn't belong here. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Kayla finally said, voice low and raspy, I don't know. I didn't mean to. It just... When you walked in, I thought maybe you were lost or waiting on someone. You didn't think I looked like... Kayla cut herself off. Didn't look like what? Kayla swallowed. Like the kind of person who owns hotels. Vanessa didn't blink. And what does that kind of person look like? Kayla had no answer. That's the problem, Vanessa said quietly. We all carry that picture in our heads. White, clean-cut, usually male, older. And that picture messes with our judgment, whether we realize it or not. I'm sorry, Kayla said, barely above a whisper. I really am. I know it's not enough, but I mean it. Vanessa nodded. It's a start. But I didn't come here for an apology. I came because I wanted you to see me, not just as the CEO or the woman you misjudged, as a person. Kayla looked confused. I was you once, Vanessa said. Started out as a receptionist. Got mistaken for cleaning staff more times than I can count. People called me sweetheart or honey, like I was there to make coffee, not run the place. And every time I had to choose, push back or let it slide. When I finally made it to the boardroom, I swore I'd create spaces where people like you could grow. Kayla's eyes widened. You were really a receptionist? Vanessa smiled. In St. Paul. My first boss told me I sounded too educated for the phones and moved me to night audit. That's how it all started. Kayla let out a short laugh. That's wild. It shouldn't be, Vanessa said. It should be normal. She stood. I don't need you to be perfect, but I do need you to pay attention. Every person who walks into this place, whether they're in sneakers or a suit, deserves to be treated with dignity. Start there, and you won't have to fix what didn't need to be broken in the first place. Kayla stood too. Thank you for talking to me. I mean that. Vanessa gave her a small nod, then walked out. But as she stepped back into the hallway, something in her felt lighter, because the message had finally landed. By mid-morning, the Oakmark Grand had settled into its usual rhythm. Guests wheeling luggage over shiny floors, coffee orders floating through the air, a small family asking about the nearest zoo. Business as usual. On the surface, nothing had changed. But in the management office, the air felt different. Brent stood at the window watching the valet shuffle cars outside. Carlos typed quietly at his laptop, drafting the internal memo. Marta from HR was reviewing updated onboarding materials, her face serious. And in the middle of it all, Vanessa sat with a fresh stack of evaluations, scanning them one by one. Personnel flagged for review. Her eyes were sharp, her expression calm. I'm not here to punish, she said out loud, flipping a page. I'm here to make sure this doesn't happen again. Carlos looked up from his notes. We're updating how we interview for front desk roles. Skills still matter, but we're adding empathy checks, pattern testing, bias awareness. Good, Vanessa replied, tapping her pen lightly against the desk. And add me to the rotation. Starting next quarter, I'll start showing up at random locations. No notice, just like I did here. Brent raised an eyebrow. You want to go undercover? Not undercover, she said. Just unannounced, until I'm not. Carlos let out a half smile. That's going to keep a lot of folks on edge. Perfect, she said. Let them feel that. The real job doesn't come with a warning sign. She stood and gathered the papers into a folder. Get the new training live by next Friday. And don't just throw policies at them. Add real stories. I want team members reading actual guest experiences. No sugar-coated scripts. Real words. Human ones. Brent nodded. Got it. Vanessa stepped out of the office and made her way into the lobby. She paused near the front desk where a new agent had taken over. He greeted her right away, a respectful smile that showed he got it. She wasn't just another executive passing through. She nodded back, then glanced around. Everything looked calm, polished even, but she could feel it. Those tiny cracks forming in the old comfortable ways of doing things. That's how real change starts. Not with a flashy press release or a loud apology. It begins with quiet corrections, done again and again until they stick. She headed to the elevator, back upstairs to grab her things. Her flight wasn't until later, so there was no rush. When she stepped off on the 12th floor, the air smelled of clean linens and a hint of lemon. Her suite door was propped open. Housekeeping had just finished. Inside, everything was ready. Her bag was packed neatly, laptop resting on the desk, charger coiled and secured. But one thing stood out, a folded note on the nightstand. She opened it. "Miss Claiborne, thank you for your grace. I'll be better. Kayla." It wasn't fancy, no envelope, just a lined piece of notepad paper and careful handwriting, but it meant more than any polished apology ever could. Vanessa folded it and slipped it into her purse. Downstairs, her car was already waiting. As she stepped out through the lobby doors, the same doorman from the night before opened the door with purpose. "Safe travels, Miss Claiborne," he said with warmth. "We hope to see you again soon." She smiled. "You will." As the car pulled away from the curb, she didn't look back. She didn't have to. She wasn't leaving behind luggage. She was leaving behind something much heavier, the quiet, constant pressure of being underestimated, of always having to prove what should already be known. What replaced it was something lighter, understanding, discomfort, growth. Not just for them, but for her, too. But there was one last thing she wanted to say, not to the hotel, not to the staff, to anyone who's ever had to stand in a room and prove they belonged. The ride to the airport was quiet. No music, no small talk, just the steady hum of the road and the rhythm of turn signals. Vanessa sat in the back seat, one hand on her purse, the other holding Kayla's note. She hadn't reread it, but it was there, a quiet reminder that the night before wasn't wasted. She watched the city pass by, brick buildings, corner stores, worn-out signs for auto shops and bakeries. This wasn't where she planned to be this week, but maybe she was meant to be here. Not for the meeting, not for business, but for the moment, for the conversation. Because truthfully, this wasn't shocking anymore. It didn't make her angry. It made her tired. Tired of how often worth is mistaken for appearance. Tired of how quickly people put others into boxes without asking a single question. Tired of having to say what should be obvious. Yes, this is mine. Yes, I built it. Yes, I deserve to be here. And still, she wasn't bitter. That's what people always get wrong. Vanessa didn't carry bitterness. She carried memory. And memory, when used right, can change everything. As the airport signs came into view, her mind drifted to the version of herself who started it all. The girl working late nights in second-hand shoes and stiff uniforms. No makeup, no credit, just drive. Just the hope that one day she'd build something no one could take from her. She had done that. But buildings weren't the finish line. Because even with 17 hotels and a team of executives, people still looked at her and saw less. So what do you do when the world refuses to see you clearly? You see yourself, without apology, without shrinking, and then you walk in anyway. You hold your ground, you speak with clarity, and you act like the door was always yours. Vanessa stepped out of the car, grabbed her bag, and gave the driver a small nod. No need for words. Inside the terminal, the usual rush was in full swing. Travelers weaving through with coffee in hand and suitcases rolling behind them. Airport announcements echoing through the air. She moved quietly through it all, just another face in the crowd. But something inside her had shifted. What started as a moment of dismissal had become a mirror. And not just for her. Everyone back at that hotel had been forced to take a long, honest look at themselves. And mirrors don't lie. They show the truth, whether you're ready for it or not. She hoped Kayla would take that truth and grow. She hoped Neil would reflect and change. She hoped Carlos and Brent would do more than make promises, they'd follow through. But even if they didn't, Vanessa knew she'd still be standing. She always had. Because dignity wasn't something handed to her. It was something she refused to let go of. This story is more than just a moment of conflict in a hotel lobby. It's a powerful reflection on identity, dignity, and quiet strength. Vanessa's journey is both personal and universal. She walks into a space she built with her own hands, only to be treated as if she doesn't belong. But instead of lashing out, she turns the moment into a lesson, not through anger, but through presence, clarity, and grace. What's most striking about Vanessa is how she carries her power. She doesn't need to shout or demand attention. She leads by example, with calm resolve and deep self-respect. Her strength doesn't come from titles or wealth, but from knowing her worth and standing in it without apology. That's rare, and that's what makes her unforgettable. The story also highlights how deeply ingrained bias can be. The assumptions made about Vanessa weren't based on her actions, but on how she looked, something far too many people can relate to. And yet, she responds not with vengeance, but with the desire to create awareness, growth, and change. She reminds us that real transformation often begins in discomfort, when people are forced to face the gap between who they think they are and how they actually behave. The deeper message is clear. Dignity isn't something you earn from others. It's something you claim and protect for yourself. And leadership isn't always loud. It's sometimes found in the quiet moments when you choose compassion over ego, truth over pride. Vanessa's story encourages us to see others more clearly, to challenge our assumptions, and most importantly, to walk through the world with the kind of grace that leaves no doubt. We belong, whether anyone recognizes it or not. If this story made you stop, reflect, or feel something real, share it. Drop a comment. And if you want more stories that speak to truth, strength, and the people who won't be ignored, hit subscribe.